My name's Walter Georis. I moved to the Monterey Peninsula in 1970 as a young hippie, 25 years old. My VW and my oil paints and leather tools for making handbags. Soon after moving up here, I started designing and doing the marketing and importing for Birkenstock shoes. The first iconic shot was a footprint in the sand next to a sandal, and it said, designed by nature, made by Birkenstock. That shot was shot on Carmel Beach. The footprint was of Jonathan Baer, who was the first professional cyclist in the Tour de France. He was just out of high school at that time. Shortly after that, my family, some relatives of mine, moved up to Carmel. I invited the whole family to come and buy a house. In 1970, 71, 72, you could buy a house in Carmel for $12,000. So I invited the family to come and buy some real estate, which I had done the first year I moved here. One of the family members was a brother-in-law who was a chef. He was in his early 20s. And so we decided to open up a little restaurant together. And we did. It was called La Boheme. This is 1974. The restaurant is still located there under a different name now, La Bicyclette. And at one point we decided that we wanted to have our own home for our restaurant. And I bought an old house and redesigned it, converted it into a commercial space called Casanova Restaurant. That was in 1977. Today we're still in full operation with a staff of about 80 people. Same recipes. A lot of the dessert recipes originated from my hometown in Belgium, done by my uncle Nicholas, who was a baker. Those were brought, those recipes, and my mother used to bake all the pies and desserts at that time. In 1983, I designed and built a restaurant in Pacific Grove called Fandango. Fandango was basically a footprint of Casanova, but in Pacific Grove rather than Carmel. And we had that restaurant till about 1987, 88 when we sold it, for me to be able to start building a winery in Upper Carmel Valley in the Casanova area. The vineyards were planted early 1980s, primarily to Merlot and Cabernet, Malbec, Petit Verdot, and Cabernet Franc. Where we planted is the old Nason Ranch, which is one of Carmel Valley's older families who did farming and raising cattle and horses. Since then, we've built a winery and we produce estate wines, red estate wines, high level, high standard, terroir reflective wines that are unique to our appellation of Carmel Valley. Since then, we've opened another restaurant in Carmel Valley called the Corkscrew. My wife and I, Sylvia, run it. We're there just about every day. The idea is we knew we were going to spend a lot of time there. If you own a restaurant, you spend a lot of time there, or at least if you plan to have some kind of success. And I wanted to make sure that it reflected really kind of the lifestyle that we enjoy living. And in so doing, we've created an environment that transports you. It can transport you to all sorts of different places, but it really kind of takes you into a book of where you'd like to go to, a place in the sun. So there are parts you can think you could be somewhere in Mexico, or you could be in New Mexico, or you could be in Provence, or you can be in Tuscany. Depending on what your dream is, you end up there. The food reflects those different areas, and basically you transport it without the jet lag. Over the years, property became available around those businesses, And not too far after, about 3 or 4 years after establishing those businesses, I built an art center and an art studio for myself across the street on Pilot Road, Carmel Valley. My background is fine arts. I studied photography with William Mortensen in Southern California, and studied painting from 1971 till 74 with a local painter known as S.C. Yuan. I was his apprentice. He was my mentor, and my painting style still reflects some influence from our relationship back in the 70s. I continue to paint, and that's still my passion and what I consider my profession to be. I did have, while in high school, a professional musical career, which was down in San Clemente. And the music was inspired by the surf culture, and we were basically one of the innovating bands of that surf culture. In 1964, while in high school, my group, the Sandals, wrote the music to The Endless Summer, a classic surf cult film, if you will, a great surf film of all times. As a matter of fact, a reference to surf filmmaking today. We also wrote more music for Dick Barrymore, for ski movies, and then later on in the 90s wrote more music for The Endless Summer too. I continue writing some music, composing, and for a specific project which are film or advertising related. 2 years ago, I was inspired to do a documentary film, documentary surf film called Shaped. And what that film's theme is and purpose is to pay tribute to the unsung heroes of the surf industry. And that is the shapers, those young men and women in the 50s, late 50s and 60s who were the innovators and created the different types of model surfboards that allowed the sport to progress and to ultimately create an industry that is an international multi-billion-dollar industry that we know today. Shaped is a documentary film that is approximately a 1-hour movie, and that has traveled and done the film festival circuit and has been well received. What is next? There's several projects in mind, film-related and music-related, but too early to talk about. Basically, as a child, I was raised in Belgium, and all my relatives were farmers or had industries relating to farming. My grandfather was a blacksmith, and so was my father. We had wheat fields, watermills, and as I mentioned earlier, my uncle was a baker. So land has always been important to me. The smell of the land, what grows on land, what you can harvest from land. The reason why I moved to Carmel, away from Southern California, is because there's a better sense of season. Where Southern California, everything was between spring and summer, and years would fly by. Carmel, being further north, allowed me to kind of get reacquainted with what I was familiar with in Europe, and that is the 4 seasons. Agriculture being always close to my heart and being in touch with the soil attracted me to being in the wine industry. More important than the wine industry, actually growing grapes, which is really where wine is being made. Carmel Valley is appealing to me. We have the 3 different climates, and I like the hot, but not for too long. I like cool weather, I like rain, and I like the snow, and occasionally in the wintertime up in the vineyards we do get snow. I realized as I started planting vineyards and being involved in the community that in fact Carmel Valley traditionally and still to some extent and not being reclaimed is a whole agricultural community. Whereas at one time it was known for walnut trees, pear trees, dairies and so on. And I think through the contemporary a movement of agriculture, from organic agriculture to growing grapes and many other products now with olive trees and producing fabulous olives. We're basically reclaiming the use of that wonderful land and the microclimate that permits these great products to come off of that land. So I think we're very fortunate to have been able to mix horse ranches, cattle ranch, agriculture, and residential and some limited commercial use of the land. And so I believe it's one of the last California frontiers where the lifestyle is pretty exceptional. What is unique is obviously the soil and the microclimate. And then what you do is, as a viticulturist or enologist, you just try to pay tribute to really what's there rather than trying to manipulate it. In today's industry, a lot of people manipulate the commodity, the grapes, and in order to get certain ratings and perception of quality. Basically, the way I treat the grapes and the wine is as a food. So it's very important to me to stay true to what that soil and that terroir is willing to produce. And so we make a good, honest wine that's not manipulated, organic vineyards, and not organic wines by definition, but are organically grown. And we have a very small appellation, which works for us and against us, because it worked for us, that keeps us unique as well. But where it works against us, that we don't have the momentum of a lot of financing for marketing and so on, which is just fine with me because I'm doing it for the passion of it, rather than trying to justify it as a money-making business, which would alter my lifestyle, which I already have the lifestyle. The money just ends up being the lubricant to maintain it. So the appellation, I think, is producing some nice product. What is very interesting, a lot of people now are sharing that passion and realize that it's feasible to produce quality wines in Carmel Valley. So we have a lot of people that grow little vineyards. Several people, as I mentioned earlier, are growing olive trees and producing some world-class olive oil. We also have people producing lavender, honey. So kind of this sustainable lifestyle has developed beautifully in Carmel Valley. We're fortunate on the Monterey Peninsula that we've been a little bit neglected in the 60s and 70s. During the time where a lot of damage was done in Southern California, where I lived, where these communities were absolutely gorgeous. So it took a long time for that movement, 20-some years, to come up, but there was a consciousness and a sense of protecting the environment, if you will, and the community, architecturally, whichever. So I believe that the damage in our community has been pretty controlled, and the future looks good to me, because some of the problems we've had has protected us. A lack of water has protected us. Now we have other options. Technology is moving so rapidly that there's so many options that we can do. And what is fabulous is that people can actually live in our community, and yet their profession normally in the past would force them to live in Los Angeles, New York, in areas where they really didn't want to live, but they had to pay the price of living there in order to be able to maintain their career. We have, as a regular customer, Rupert Murdoch, who has a home in Carmel Valley, who comes to the Corkscrew and sits down with his paper, has an iced tea or a glass of wine. My gosh, we have people from all over the world. It's fabulous to have that, the level of awareness, intelligence, performance, commitment, disciplines. We're kind of a jewel box of all of these great, great things. And then we can talk about the fabulous golf industry we have, which become green zones, if you will, that protects us. The deer are running around down by the beach. Yesterday on the way back from the party, which was at Boheme, where I saw probably 30, 40 deer on the way back, and very few cars. And it's what a place.